Well, hello friends, it is a fun day of gardening because we are gonna put some containers together. Now, you can see behind me, we're gonna put these 3 containers together with beautiful new mandevilla that I found. And what I love about this bed already, it's looking beautiful. The purple sensation allium are doing well. The Mount Everest allium are just about to open up and bloom. There's some hydrangea that are just about to come. So this bed is beautiful on its own, but then these 3 containers really add color all throughout the season. So we're gonna go through all that. We're gonna go to the end of the driveway where it gets super dry and hot and just total sun all season long. And I'm gonna tell you how I combat that. That's where more comes into play, all the plants that I keep year to year, the agave that I love, and why I use them out there. And then we're gonna finish at the front door. And that is where I'm gonna show you some of the elephant ear that I keep, where they maybe don't look the best today, because I just brought them out of storage. But in a couple weeks, it is gonna be filled up and beautiful. This is all about gardening the way that works for you, or in this case, works for me. How I'm doing a mixture of annuals that bloom, things that I save, and how I love each one for the different areas and make it work for me. So come garden with me and let's get started. So I think it's good to show where we're gonna start actually planting here, which is these 3 containers that are across my driveway. So these are on the east side of my driveway, but they really don't get morning light until around 10 a.m. and then they get some direct hot sun for a while. So they probably get closer to a mix of sun and shade than complete full hot sun. But I usually plant things here that are more for hot sun because it can be pretty windy, can be right in the elements. So what I have are 3 trellises. Now I'm using a slightly smaller trellis than last year. Last year I used a trellis that was all the way to the edges, and then any of the filler annuals I wanted to put with the plant in the middle just really were getting too tight in there because of the trellis. So this is gonna be a little bit smaller trellis, so you can see it leaves me a few inches all the way around to be able to plant some other things. Now, what I like about this trellis is it kind of just recedes with whatever grows on it. I put a mandevilla in here last year too, but this year I'm going with one with a little bit of color, so let's look at what plants we're actually gonna be planting here. Whenever I get ready to plant something, I more like to have a lot of things around that I wanna use, and then as I'm actually going to plant it, I really decide what I'm gonna do. So you see a whole swath in front of me. I may use all of it and I may use just a few things, but that's what we're gonna see here as I'm putting them together. So these are the giant peach mandevilla, which I think there's one blooming and I really want you to see it. The color right there, look at that beautiful color. Now imagine that against the dark green of this big hedge of trees behind here. And I think that's gonna actually just be beautiful. Now the giant peach, it's like, I think giant peach sunrise is the exact name. It's a big leaf with that shiny, beautiful quality. So it has that tropical quality to it, but it's gonna encompass this whole trellis, which is really what I want, and just be full of blooms all summer long. So I'm going really simple with the annuals around it. I'm gonna do some dragon wing begonias. This is that, I think, pink on chocolate variety. What I like is the leaf is gonna be obviously foliage and color on its own. And then the color of the actual bloom is slightly similar to that as it fades open to the actual peach color of the mandevilla, which I really like how they play together. I also have some griffin begonia, which I think would do really nice in the back because they get so big. I may use a little bit of lemon coral sedum. We're gonna see it's that annual sedum I usually love because it's super hardy. It can be drought tolerant. It's kind of a workhorse all summer long. And then the Tradescantia, I started using this last year, the pistachio white, and I really like how it falls down containers really easily and has that bright pop of white and green stripes. And then I do have some Kint's Beauty also, ornamental oregano, which I started using this a few years ago. It's a tender perennial, so in some areas it can be a pretty easy perennial. I wanna say it's zone 5 or zone 6, but I pretty much am able just to use it as an annual. Sometimes I save it over the winter, but once it starts growing, it gets, you can kind of see it in the picture, a little bit more pink on the edges, which is really pretty. So anytime I'm working with a big container like this one is, obviously there's a lot of soil in it. Sometimes when I use large containers, half of it's gonna be like a hardwood mulch, then the rest of it will be soil. Sometimes I use all soil, but year to year I don't replace it all. I usually only replace the top like foot or so of soil, and then about every 2 to 3 years, I replace maybe all the soil within that container. So this soil was all brand new last year, so I'm more just rehabbing what's already in here. It's super easy still to work with. If there's any obstructive roots from the year before, I always think about making sure to remove them all because I don't want to inhibit any of this year's root growth, and possibly then removing more of the soil too. But you can see this one, super easy to work with. Now, I'm of course just gonna top dress it with the Espoma all-purpose potting soil that I always use. And I will put in plenty of biotone too. So I get big bags of biotone because I use it so much. You can get small, nice little 4-pound bags. What I like about biotone, it's a starter plant food, but it also just feeds the plant. It's nothing that's gonna kind of stimulate too much growth and be a quick feed. It's gonna be a nice, slow feed for those roots to really get acclimated into their new area. So that's why I really like using it. So what I'm getting ready here is just making sure I mix that biotone right into the soil so anything I plant will now be able to benefit from that. And then I'm gonna start with my mandevilla back here. Now, they always come with some type of bamboo. Some people like to leave that in and just use it. I usually more go towards removing it, which is usually held together by rubber bands, which I like to remove too. I don't like to keep anything like that in the garden. What's nice about it is this one isn't so tight to take off that bamboo that it's hard to work with. What I will do is always break up just lightly. Now, when roots are not too thick or encircling too much, I do a very light, gentle, kind of just removal of the bottom little bits because they're not so bad that they're encircling and encroaching on it. Now, I'm keeping it a little bit at a height where you can see I have room around it to actually now put more soil, but I don't want to do that until I really get this ready to go. So what I'm going to do is put all this up into the middle of this trellis. Now, if you remember or have been following, these trellis have lights on them at Christmas, so I had to take lights off of this one. Some of them I have extra of, some of them I don't, but this one I did have to take lights off of. So what I'm going to do is now just train some of this right away on this new trellis. So this to me just jump starts what it's gonna do. As they were sitting by my shed and I had the trellis sitting by them to kind of decide which one I was gonna use, they were already just encircling on the trellis. So it really takes no time for them to wanna start growing on one of these. It's in their nature just to right away grab on, which is really nice. Okay, this doesn't always work. This one happened to work that there was one vine pretty much for each of the trellis. That's not always gonna work, but it actually happened to work really well here. So what I'm gonna do is top dress with the potting soil. And then since those annuals I'm putting in are so small, I like to put in this potting soil first because I think it's easier to plant them in here as opposed to set them in without the potting soil and try to plant and put more soil in around them. So I'm gonna make sure I get this all the way around and then we can grab the annuals. This is usually what I do when I'm going to actually plant something like this is I will just set in the annuals all around it because I really want to make sure I like it from all sides and I'll walk around it as I'm doing it to make sure that's really the look I want. Now this is pretty easy because no one's ever gonna be on the back of it. So it's all about this front side. But what I am gonna do is just put a griffin in the back, which if you have not grown griffin begonia, what I like is they can take some sun, they can take some shade, and they get really big. Like they get over 18 inches, sometimes up to 24 inches. So they really get nice and large, and that's really what I want in the back. So it's kind of growing more for the foliage, the griffin is. But remember, this mandevilla is all about the blooms. So all the blooms are gonna be coming from the actual mandevilla, and we're going to more encompass everything else with just some great annuals. So the dragonwing begonias, they're a workhorse, right? We use them, I love them with Kimberly Queen ferns. I love them in slightly shade to sun spots because they can take a good amount of sun, but they do really well in some shade too, and that's what I really like. Now, when I have a really big annual, and let's say I wanna save some money, which I always wanna save some money, the lemon coral, a lot of times just come up, and I'll show you here. When they get really big like this, these lemon coral are the easiest thing just to take cuttings from too and root, but I will go in and I will just take this, break it in half, and get 2 plants where there was 1. And that to me is the best thing because now I can put 1 there and 1 over here, and I easily know it's just gonna all root in, and I'm gonna nicely have 2 plants. It's just a nice way sometimes to save a little bit of money. And I know we all wanna start with the biggest plants we can, but you know what? We don't have to. Okay, I'm gonna finish this pot up, plant the other 2, and then we're gonna move on. Obviously, anytime you plant anything then, since all three of these are done, they need to obviously have a drink, and that's super important. I know even if we think, oh, the plants are wet when we put them in, no problem. Annuals and things in containers, the big thing is to have soil that drains well, which this all-purpose soil always does. Make sure it has drainage holes, but also make sure it gets ample watering. Things will dry out quickly, and it needs that moisture. If we drink, the plants need a drink. And then since these are blooming annuals, I am gonna, of course, use just some Bloom Biospoma 2. It's a liquid fertilizer that I like to put in. So if you look on the back, anytime there's a higher phosphate number, which there's 3 numbers on fertilizer, the middle number is the phosphate. When that is higher, it is a bloom, hopefully a bloom boosting fertilizer. So that's what this liquid is, and I'll probably use it about every other week during the growing season because I want these Mandevilla, you know, they have one life here this season. I want the Mandevilla to live well. I want them to produce as many blooms as possible. Same with the begonias. So since these are blooming things with lots of color, which if you have followed me, I think a few of you might say you don't usually use a lot of color. It's true, usually I do a lot more foliage, but these Mandevilla are all about the color, all about the blooms with the begonias. So I will be making sure to water them all. So we're walking out towards my entryway, which is not too far from where we were just planting. And this is always, to me, a slightly tricky spot. It is full sun, full wind, all day the heat, all summer long. And no matter what I plant here, it is gonna dry out really quickly. And I love the 2 cast iron urns that I use, but what's the bad part about them? And I'll show you here. While they're beautiful cast iron urns, they dry out very quickly because they don't have a lot of room. Even though they're big urns, they're probably about 3 foot tall, a little over 2 feet across. Inside of them doesn't hold that much soil. So what I put is a mixture of things that will do well in the full brunt of this weather out here. So I'm gonna show you how I get my agave ready for the center, what I put around it, and how to make sure it's gonna be really foolproof. So even if I don't get to watering it, maybe just only once a week, it's still gonna do well. I have always been one that has a liking of various structural plants, and that especially comes true with agave. So agave have been something that probably about 10 years ago, I really started getting into, and I think it was because I loved the form of them. I loved that architectural, really kind of striking form. But what I also love about them is they're very easy for me to keep over the winter. I can put them in my plant room, but I put them on a cold side where it stays between 40 and 50 degrees. They get minimal light, but they all overwinter beautifully. Now, when working with agave, there's a few things you definitely want to know. They're not just they're easy. They're not just though a stress-free plant. You have to be very careful when you're working around them. A lot of them have tips that are quite pointy. They can really hurt you and poke you. If it's a really large one, I'll wear safety glasses. This one, when I'm standing, is not that large. You can notice I'm wearing long sleeves. That's another thing I make sure to do. But if you're working with a large one, put on safety glasses, put on anything to make sure you're gonna stay away. Gloves, leather gloves can be really good. This one actually for the ones I work with is pretty small. I have a 5-foot one that I put under my kitchen window. I call it Veronica. That one's really big and that one I have to really suit up for. This one I'm not too worried about, but what you will notice is it was in the same pot for probably at least 2 years. And if we look at it, look at those roots and how thick and hard they are. So I pulled it out of the pot here just a few minutes ago. Now, I can get brutal with plants. I have a video that I posted of splitting a philodendron, and my goodness, that thing has garnered so many controversial views of looking like I'm gonna kill the plant. I didn't kill it, my philodendron did beautiful. But what I am gonna do with this big root ball, which you'll notice a lot of these outside roots are dried up anyway, they're not really active. I'm gonna right away cut it by about 2/3, keeping only that top third of root growth. And I'm just using a really sharp outdoor knife. And this is what I use to actually get in my pumpkins and squash with too, usually in the fall. What I'm doing is just cutting through all of this dense root growth. So anytime even we're planting a tree, if roots are really tight, there's a few things that are really bad. That means the plant is overgrown in the container it's in. It means it's not gonna be able to soak up moisture very well, but it also can start rotting if it just sits too wet because all those roots are so compacted. So really what I'm doing here, by breaking these up and just cutting off a big hunk of it, this is only gonna happen once it gets really growing, but agave have very vigorous roots. I'm giving it now more room to shoot out new growth, to send out new roots and actually be replenished. So this is what I do with a lot of my agave. If not yearly, I do it maybe every other year. So this is also a good time you'll notice. This one has tons of what I call pups. So it's all these little agave right beside it. And this is where I end up getting too many, because as you pull them off, look at all those roots attached. These are all brand new plants that you can pot up. You can give these away to friends. And you just have tons and tons of beautiful plants to work with. So usually, now I don't know if I did this last year with this one, I don't remember. Usually I do that about once or every other year where I take off all the pups. Now, some form and in their natural habitat, those pups just keep growing beside them and it becomes a mound. I like to keep them as a structural single plant. So that's why I remove those, so I have more room to be able to keep it and kind of keep it in check size-wise. This is also when I will cut off any of the leaves here that are getting dried on the tips or just don't look that good. It's just kind of a time to clean it up. And this is true of any of the plants I bring out of winter storage. Because, you know, I think a lot of people ask me, why don't you plant just tons more blooming annuals? One, it's because I'm just drawn to things like this. But two, it's because I love to be able to keep plants like this year to year and reuse them in all my containers and not have to worry about watering quite as much as I do with like the mandevilla we just planted. So after I have it cleaned up, I think we should take it out. We'll pot it up and I'll show you what I'm gonna put with it. In these beds, there's a lot of color going on. I have lots of cat's pajamas that you can see down here, which is a nepeta or catmint, which what I love is I put it in big swaths and kind of a mass planting of it, at least 5, if not 8 of them together at a time. And so you get this big impact to color. So up here in this urn, that's why I like to do something that has a little bit more structure like this does. Now I already put biotone in this urn when I was getting it ready earlier, and I have some fresh soil right on top. So I'm just pushing it back enough that I can just get to it here and set my plant right in the center. So I totally understand that this isn't for everyone, but I think that's kind of the fun about gardening, is that we all are drawn to different things. Same with plants. We're all drawn to different plants and we enjoy them. So you can see I can just pop it right in, and instantly it has that big structural feel. So to me, when I get something like this potted, I don't need too much with it. And again, we're not gonna do heavy watering annuals or things that want a lot of work because there just isn't room in there for them. And there's not enough water that's gonna keep that watered all day. What I am gonna do is a mixture of 2 more what I have found to be drought tolerant plants. So a friend sent me some wonderful starts of this peperomia last year. I really, really love it because it's a tetraphila, I think is what it is. And I like it because it cascades down, it roots really easily, so if you want cuttings from it, you can do that. And then I'm gonna intermix it with that lemon coral again, so you get that bright pop of lime green against some really fun succulent texture. Now that everything's planted, of course it's gonna get a good watering here from the beginning and for a little while to get everything just established and those roots acclimated. But this one is what's fun is it's kind of a set it and forget it for the summer. I don't have to worry about doing anything to it. I don't have to worry about those flowers continuing to bloom, but I do get this striking color of the agave with yellow edges on the green leaves. I get the beautiful succulents, the peperomia that are just gonna trail off it, and that lemon coral for a pop of color against all this cat's pajamas nepeta. There's allium that are gonna bloom really soon behind me. So all this really plays really well together and gives a lot of color without just blooms right away. So we're gonna walk up to my front door and you're gonna see what looks like an ugly plant, but it's one I save every year. And again, I love to save plants. If nothing else, it's just a good, I don't know, I like to test myself. We're gonna walk past Veronica. See, she's big. I just wrestled her in there earlier today. I think I did film a video of it. So if you wanna see on YouTube, there is a video of me putting it in there. It's a little bit of a wrangler every year to kind of get it up in there because you have to be very careful, you have to be dressed well, and I really like the once it's in there. So we're going up by my front door. So this is a whole area where I just really love how simple it is. There's tons of boxwood, there's tons of Sun King Aurelia coming, there's allium that are blooming. The foxtail lilies back here, look how beautiful they're blooming. But what we're going on is that pot right there, right by my door. So it is I think it's a coffee cups elephant ear. And I've had it now, this will be its 4th year. And I have a few of them. I planted them as small quart-sized plants 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And they've grown, they're quite large now. So I let them go into my plant room. They go slightly dormant, as you can see. There's a few leaves that are on there. But in like a few weeks, they shoot out tons of growth, beautiful dark color. They like the sun. So this is an east-facing door that most people enter my house through. And it gets a lot of heat. So in the bottom of this container, this is a heavy cement container. I like it because it has a faux bois texture to it, meaning it kind of looks like wood was imprinted, like in the making of it. And it's sitting on a big antique limestone architectural salvage piece. So I kind of created my own stand and pot out of it. Now it does have a good drainage hole, and I do always put a pottery shard or something over it. In the past I have used even like a fine hardware cloth, but that sometimes can, or hardware mesh, that can let out a little bit of the soil. So honestly, just a little shard where the water can still go through, but the soil stays in. I'm gonna obviously start with some soil. Now, the one thing when I'm saving plants like this, I only set them in this black container, this plastic container, in the fall when I take them out the previous year. So they're not really setting in too many roots yet into this. Now you're gonna say, this looks pretty scraggly, but there's a lot of bulbs of elephant ear in here. And this is the thing. I don't always think a garden needs to start looking perfect from day one. It takes time, and I'm okay with working on my plants and knowing I save them year to year. And once they get outside is when they really start growing and living up. You know, growing up, we would do everything we could, or Mom would, to be able to plant as many plants as she could, but still save money. So she would start all her own geraniums from just little cuttings. And by the time spring came, they maybe didn't look big, but she was able to plant them all outside. And then soon enough, they were gonna look really gorgeous. Now what I am gonna do, okay, I'm a little shocked. This put on more root growth than I thought it would by now. So over the winter, they were quite happy, even though they look a little scraggly. I am just going to knock off some of that soil, but really keep the roots intact. I'm gonna set it up here. That's gonna be beautiful here. Now I know at first it's not looking that great, but why I picked this for here this year, the sun obviously, but also the dark color of all of these stems and the actual leaves themselves is gonna really pop out against the white siding I have. So I really wanted that. Now, since this soil, it's that same Espoma all-purpose pine soil, since I just put it in here last year with some biotone last fall, it has not been used that much. So I'm gonna still use it around this plant because it has only sat over the winter and has not really had a growing season with it. So sometimes when I do that, I will supplement. You could use some more biotone if you wanted to. You could also use a little bit of plant tone, but this has not really been out for a season, so I don't feel bad using this soil and not just getting rid of it. And instead of putting a cloth down, which, yeah, I know, some people are gonna say something, I just go get my leaf blower and I'll blow all this off, the soil and everything when I'm done. So now, what are we gonna use for filler? I mean, this is where I'm gonna actually use, I didn't end up using the Kint's Beauty earlier. So I'm gonna use this Kint's Beauty because it's gonna look so good against that dark maroon stem. And that's what I really like about it. Now, I did one year, I think, keep Kint's Beauty over the winter, but honestly, sometimes it's just easier to start with some new plants too. So I'm gonna stick it right in there. I again want some pop of color, so I'm gonna use lemon coral sedum. Now, yes, you could use petunias. You know, the thing with petunias is you have to keep them deadheaded. The Super Bell varieties usually do a little bit better. You don't have to deadhead them quite as much. But I just like all this structure and color I get with using some plants like this. And so that's why you'll see me doing this a lot of times. It's not that I don't feel like you can use blooming. If you want to use petunias, go ahead and use them. This is just kind of the colors I'm drawn to. And I really like how simple it is. Now, I don't put any in the back because, as you can guess, it's just against the siding, and this is gonna fill in so much that you're not gonna see it. So I'm gonna finish putting soil in and wrap up. So friends, today we did 3 different containers that have different areas. All of them have a mixture of sun, some of them full sun, some of them partial sun. Some of them, like the end of the driveway, is for a completely dry, harsh environment. Some of them, like across the driveway, are for color and beauty and blooms all throughout the season. And then some, the ones by the front door, are gonna look good here as they really start to fill in and are for their foliage and for their texture. And I think that's what I hope to always show, is that I do gardening my way. I do it what works for me, and I think that's each what we have to do. What you find enjoyment in, what you find beauty in, do it, and don't worry about what other people think. That's what I'm gonna do. So, as always, share this video around, and until next time, tell me what you're gonna be planting in your garden. Tell me what annuals you're planting, what you're putting in containers, because I wanna hear all about it.